Letters released. Messages written by former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick to 3 men he allegedly abused are made public. We have a report from Rome. An end to violence. Lawmakers begin debate on plans to prevent future mass shootings. Escalating tensions. The Trump administration makes a new move against the socialist government of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. We're at the White House. And a helping hand. We hear about the charitable work being done by the world's largest Catholic fraternal order. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, August 6, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. New information emerges in the case of Theodore McCarrick. Letters and postcards from the disgraced former cardinal to 3 men he allegedly abused are now public. The former Archbishop of Washington signed the handwritten correspondence, Uncle T, or Your Uncle, Father Ted. Pope Francis defrocked McCarrick in February. It came after a church investigation determined he sexually abused minors and adult seminarians. McCarrick denies the allegations. Courtney Grogan, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency, is covering this story from Rome. Courtney, what can you tell us about these letters?
Wyatt, the Associated Press published letters and postcards today that McCarrick wrote to 3 men who say the former cardinal sexually abused and harassed them. In the letters, the former bishop corresponded with the seminarians in ways that seemed to fit the pattern of grooming, according to experts quoted by AP. The AP also reported that one seminarian wrote to another bishop about McCarrick's inappropriate behavior in the 1980s and explained that he had seen McCarrick engage in sexual activity with other seminarians during a fishing trip. However, AP did not report the name of this other bishop.
Well, as you know, the McCarrick scandal reignited the clergy sex abuse crisis in the American church. Remind us of why McCarrick was defrocked.
Pope Francis laicized Theodore McCarrick on January 11th after an administrative penal process conducted by the Vatican Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith found McCarrick guilty of sins against the Sixth Commandment with minors and adults, the abuse of power, and solicitation in the sacrament of confession. McCarrick was publicly accused last year of sexually abusing at least 2 adolescent boys and engaging for decades in coercive sexual behavior toward priests and seminarians while he was a bishop.
A lot of really damning allegations. The Vatican still has not released information about what it knew on McCarrick and when. Can we expect that to happen?
It is unclear when the Vatican will release what they know. In October, Pope Francis ordered a review of all Vatican files pertaining to the allegations against McCarrick. The Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, said in May that the Vatican was still conducting the investigation concerning McCarrick and will issue a declaration upon the investigation's completion.
Okay, and we'll continue to watch to see how that plays out. Courtney Grogan, Catholic News Agency, Rome correspondent. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And stay with EWTN News Nightly, as well as our partners, Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register, for the latest on the abuse scandal. Under pressure to take action after the latest mass shooting, Ohio's Catholic governor is calling for expanded gun laws. Correspondent Jason Calvi has more.
Republican Governor Mike DeWine is urging lawmakers in Ohio to pass laws requiring background checks for nearly all gun sales.
And although it is dark now, the sun will shine again as we find the grace and the glory in each new sunrise and the hope of each new day.
Governor DeWine is also asking the State House for legislation allowing courts to temporarily take away guns from people perceived as a threat. Ohio's former Republican Governor John Kasich wasn't able to get it passed in 2018. The U.S. Senate in March heard testimony on these so-called red flag laws. Florida passed one after the Parkland school shooting.
It's just another tool in the toolbox to use to make sure that once we identify this person that has that propensity to do what they've indicated they're going to do, which this kid in Parkland did several times.
Yes.
Right? And he should have been taken to a facility to get the help that he needed.
President Trump appears to be open to these new gun laws.
We must make sure that those judged to pose a grave risk to public safety do not have access to firearms, and that if they do, those firearms can be taken through rapid due process.
White supremacy has got to go. Hey, hey.
And today, outside the White House, protesters urge national action now.
The purpose of this rally, in my opinion, is for all of us in every hollow in this country, every village, to get out, get involved, make sure that this kind of thing is not allowed to continue.
Jason joins us now. Jason, as Governor DeWine pushes on the issues in his state, where do background checks stand in the U.S. Congress?
Well, the House in February, Wyatt, passed a bill to close those background check loopholes like sales at gun shows. The Senate hasn't passed it, and the chamber's on recess until September. Democrats are calling for an emergency session, but the record shows Republicans may be unwilling to budge. In 2013, the Senate failed to pass a similar bill, and only 4 Republicans voted for it.
What about the president? He's showing, at least he said he's open to background checks, but he hasn't provided many details.
The president says Republicans and Democrats need to come together for stronger background checks. He didn't say anything on this issue when he spoke to the nation, though. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer accuse him of backing down. Tomorrow, the president will visit both Dayton and El Paso.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Tim Carney, commentary editor for the Washington Examiner, joins me now. Tim, welcome back. Yesterday's headline on the editorial page of the Examiner, before the president's remarks, read, quote, "Trump must name and condemn the evil of white nationalism." So he did so in his remarks afterwards. What are your thoughts today? Did the president go far enough?
I thought it was great that he started there. I think what we wrote in the editorial was that this needs to be a steady campaign, that there is, in fact, this sickness. It's a cultural sickness, that there's white supremacy, white nationalism. There's many cultural sicknesses, but this is the one that was behind that El Paso shooting. And he is in a position as a president who, there are white supremacists out there who think Trump is their guy. And he should tell them, no, I'm not your guy. And there are people teetering on the edge, and he should try to steer them away. So what I would like to, rather than judge what he said in that one comment, I'd like him to sort of continue to do it, to find new opportunities to go ahead and say, this is very un-American. He, as a Republican, should say this is very unconservative, and really make the case continuously for weeks.
And like you say, we've been so focused on the president's because, of course, the Democrats have been voicing all of their skepticism towards him. What do you think are the next steps for we as a country to come together and move towards unity?
Well, another thing that President Trump said that I thought was very good was sort of cultural change needs to happen. Now, this is tough because you saw they were yelling at Governor DeWine, do something. People want our governors, our president, our congressmen to do something. But I don't think that that is where the action is going to happen. I think that when you look at a lot of these people, there's a lot of the shooters, there's questions, was this person a loner? Were they a lone wolf? And they say, no, they weren't a lone wolf. They were plugged into these radical communities. A lot of it was online. That still means this was somebody desperately in search of belonging to something. So building a culture that leaves fewer people out, I think, is the best thing that we can do to have less of these things happen. Because then fewer people are going to turn either to white supremacy or to ISIS or any other radical ideology.
When you were on the show last, you talked about your book, Alienated America. In it, you look at the importance of the sense of community and how it plays in a healthy society. What do you think we as Catholics can do in our communities to address the root causes that spur those kinds of violence?
Well, the first thing is to include as many people as intimately as possible in our community. So that both means people who might show up at church. Parishes really have a responsibility to say, what are people in modern America lacking? And a lot of times, it's a real human level connection to do more. A donut hour after Mass might not do the trick. But then the other thing is to reach out, and Pope Francis, when he writes about the poor, always says the inclusion of the poor. And I think that's really important. Don't just give people money or some program or something, but bring people in and include them in communities. So that's the way that I look at it, is every parish is where that's where the action is going to happen. What can you do to include people who need to belong to something? And I think a Catholic parish is the ultimate tool to do that, to provide that sense of belonging and purpose.
Some important notes there, and obviously some important challenges for Catholics and all people of communities across the country. Tim Carney, commentary editor for the Washington Examiner. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
A Texas elementary school student is trying to help heal his community after this weekend's deadly shooting. 11-year-old Ruben Martinez came up with what he's calling #El Paso Challenge. The idea is for people to complete 22 random acts of kindness, one for each of the victims of the shooting. Ruben's mother said he came up with the idea himself. A Jesuit-sponsored high school in Indiana is making an appeal to the Vatican. Brebeuf Prep is asking the Holy See to overturn the Indianapolis Archbishop's decision to no longer recognize the school as Catholic. Archbishop Charles Thompson made the decision after school officials refused to fire a teacher in a same-sex marriage. For more on this story, including what the Archbishop said about the school's yearly opening mass, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. The sainthood cause for Catholic author G.K. Chesterton will not advance. He played a role in the Catholic revival in England during the early 20th century, but Bishop Peter Doyle of Northampton says several obstacles are in the way, including a lack of devotion at the local level and charges of anti-Semitism in Chesterton's writing. The Trump administration is warning foreign governments and companies they could face retaliation if they continue to do business with Venezuela and its socialist leader, Nicolas Maduro. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports.
The U.S. is turning up the heat on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Today, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton applauded the latest round of sanctions ordered by President Trump.
This is the most sweeping executive order that we've made in connection with Venezuela in the last 6 months.
A new executive order blocks companies and individuals from doing business with Venezuela's socialist government and its top supporters.
Any person or business or entity that materially assists the Maduro regime to keep it in power.
Bolton calls this type of sanction rare, but it has been used in other countries like North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Cuba. The Trump administration recognizes Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's rightful leader, and President Trump has blamed Nicolas Maduro for grave human rights abuses in Venezuela.
But people are starving, they're being killed, they're being beaten. What's going there is unfathomable.
President Trump says the U.S. stands with the people of Venezuela. Over the last few months, we've asked if that includes Venezuelans fleeing their country.
Do immigrants from Venezuela deserve asylum in the U.S., and why haven't you given them temporary protected status?
We're looking at that, and we're very much involved with the Venezuela crisis. It's a horrible thing, a horrible situation.
The Trump administration still hasn't said if it will grant temporary protected status to Venezuelan immigrants. Venezuela is reacting to these latest sanctions. The socialist government calls them a grave aggression from the U.S. Wyatt.
Mark, do the sanctions come with any exceptions for humanitarian aid?
Yes, they do. Food, medicine, and clothing can still be sent to Venezuela, and transactions with Venezuela's private sector are also spared, but banks and other companies may still cut off those transactions so they don't accidentally violate the sanctions, Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Coming up, U.S. officials respond to the latest missile test from North Korea. North Korea carries out its fourth missile launch in less than 2 weeks. U.S. officials respond, saying they will not overreact.
My understanding is they are short-range ballistic missiles. I wouldn't say we don't do anything. We monitor these very closely. We make sure we understand what they're doing. We try to understand why. But again, I think the key is to keep the door open for diplomacy.
Pyongyang's latest missile test is believed to be in protest of military drills between the U.S. and South Korea.
美方无理地给中国贴上了会操中国的标签。
China's central bank slams a U.S. decision to call the country a currency manipulator. The designation opens the door to more financial penalties from Washington. The head of China's central bank says the decision will cause turmoil in financial markets. 3 priests accused of sexual abuse are on trial in Argentina. Father Nicola Corradi, shown in a wheelchair, and 2 others face 28 counts of abuse. They're accused of misconduct by students at an institute for the deaf and face sentences between 20 and 50 years in prison. Corradi says he's innocent. The other priests have not yet entered pleas. Residents of Puerto Rico await a court decision on a potential new governor. Lawmakers gave speeches yesterday afternoon but did not vote on the legitimacy of the acting governor. Now it's up to the U.S. territory's Supreme Court to decide if he is the new leader. Ricardo Rosselló resigned last week after offensive and insulting messages he sent were made public.
The Young has never mentioned anything about Hong Kong independence or
Pro-democracy lawmakers in Hong Kong say China should not make the territory's protests a national security issue. They say the ongoing demonstrations have never mentioned anything about independence from Beijing and are aimed at Hong Kong's local government. China has condemned some people they call violent and radical protesters. Up next, Vice President Mike Pence speaks to a group fighting for religious freedom, and how the Knights of Columbus are helping persecuted Christians in the Middle East. Vice President Mike Pence says it's important to spend more time on your knees than on the internet. That's his advice to Americans who feel attacked for standing up for their religious beliefs.
As a Christian believer, we're charged to pray for our loved ones, but also pray for our enemies. And you have lots of opportunities in politics to do that.
The Vice President spoke today at an event in Arlington, Virginia, sponsored by the Alliance Defending Freedom. It's a nonprofit promoting religious freedom, the sanctity of life, and marriage. Pence says he was shocked when his wife was criticized for teaching at a Christian school that held Christian beliefs. The Knights of Columbus last year gave more than $185 million to charity. The world's largest Catholic fraternal order also donated more than 76 million hours of hands-on service in 2018. The group is holding its annual convention this week in Minneapolis. The Knights have nearly 2 million members around the world. They also are supporters of this program. Joining us now from the convention is Andrew Walther, Vice President of Communications and Strategic Planning for the Knights of Columbus. Andrew, the Vatican has praised the Knights for defending persecuted Christians in the Middle East. You've been on the ground now for 5 years. ISIS was eradicated in 2016, but what's the status of Christians in the region right now?
Well, you know, in the Middle East, it's never easy for the Christian communities there. And as ISIS receded and as these areas have been liberated, Christians began moving home. But even today, new threats have emerged. This very morning, militias from the Shia community have blockaded a number of the Christian towns in northern Iraq, including Karamlis, the town we rebuilt, including Karakosh and Bartella. So you have a constant tension, I would say, for these Christian communities that have been really badly decimated by ISIS. And here on the 5th anniversary of ISIS's invasion of northern Iraq, we see these new militias moving in and in some cases blaming the Christians for the Iraqi government's desire to remove the militias from the region. So the militias are an enormous threat. When the Supreme Knight and I went to Iraq in February and March, we heard a great deal about the problems from everyone we talked to regarding these militias. It was the same story. The militias are a huge threat. They prevent movement. As this morning, they're preventing people from entering or leaving Christian towns. And so as one threat recedes, it seems another threat emerges.
Well, with this threat now emerging, and of course so many threats to Christians and religious minorities, how do you know your aid, the aid you're collecting and partner organizations are collecting, is going directly to the Christians who need them?
Well, the Knights of Columbus has been very careful about how we give aid, and the aid that we have given in that region has predominantly gone through the church itself. So in the case of Iraq, for example, many of the Christians who fled to the Archdiocese of Erbil, which took in somewhere in the neighborhood of 120,000 people almost overnight 5 years ago, tomorrow. And as they took these people in, the church became the de facto humanitarian agency and caretaker for these people. The aid that we provided has helped these people through the church directly. So we get the receipts for the food that we help to fund, for the clinics that are run by a Catholic university in Europe that has clinics in Iraq. We, again, are seeing very detailed accounting of what they're doing. The housing units that we built in Iraq, we went and saw ourselves. We were able to go and walk through the Supreme Night and I and see the various rooms where people will live, the dining facilities, etc. So these things, in working with the church, we found a great deal of transparency. We've also worked with the Syriac Church in terms of projects that they have for refugees that fled to Lebanon, for example. We've worked with the Melkite Church for humanitarian assistance in cities like Aleppo, which was absolutely devastated. So in all of these cases, we have chosen a partner that we know is doing very good work, and then we have worked closely with that partner to facilitate the good work that they are already doing.
Well, thinking back closer to home now, today the Knights honored a 17-year-old Catholic student who gave his life to prevent the murder of his classmates in Colorado in May. What can you tell us about Kendrick Castillo and his ties to the Knights of Columbus?
Well, you know, I will tell you, there is, as we read the gospel, we see there is no greater love than laying down one's life for one's friends. And that's exactly what this young man did. And that bravery, that heroism, that heart of a knight is something that we are certainly remembering and celebrating here. This was certainly an incredibly large way that a young man very close to the Knights of Columbus, a young man who understood the Knights of Columbus, a young man who had worked with the Knights of Columbus, took action, took decisive action, saved lives, and lost his own.
Such a powerful example. On Sunday, Pope Francis wrote a letter trying to encourage Catholic clergy around the world amid the clergy abuse scandal. How has your group, how have the Knights handled the crisis?
Well, the Knights of Columbus have done several things. I think the most notable has been on display right here at the convention, which is the tour of the relic of the heart of St. John Vianney from France. And St. John Vianney was a parish priest who is the patron saint of parish priests, and an incredible example, an incredible witness of the holiness and the wonderful effect that a good, holy, prayerful priest can have. And so I think for us, among other things that we've done, certainly that tour of the relic has been something that has highlighted for priests and laity alike the power and influence that a good priest is able to have.
So many important issues facing the church today. Andrew Walther, Vice President of Communications and Strategic Planning for the Knights of Columbus, thanks so much for talking to us about all of them today.
Thank you.
And that concludes our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.